Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Marianne, let me ask you, when you were kids or maybe even as adults, and you didn't have your cell phone, but you needed to communicate, I don't know if it was growing up or recently, what's the most unusual way you've ever communicated to somebody?
This is such a great question. I have a couple of answers. Number one, I am old enough to confess and admit that I did not get my first cell phone until I got married in 2001.
Okay.
So I lived more than half my life with rotary phones. Okay. Two things. First thing is when my husband and I were dating, we didn't have text. We didn't have, what we have now. I'll just say it like that. Yeah. So communication had to be creative. And so at one point when we got serious in our dating, we shared a journal.
Oh, wow. Really?
And so we would have it for a week and write in it each day to each other and just what God was doing in our hearts and just different things. And then when I would see him at church, because or when we would go out on a date or whatever, I would give him the journal and he'd have it for a week.
Oh my God.
So that was one of the ways that we communicated to each other just on a deep level. Second, when I was a high school student, do you guys remember pagers?
Yes. I had a pager.
Oh my goodness, my pager number. And that was like pre-texting. You figured out how to send messages through your pager.
Okay, I think we've got to define what a pager is for some of our really young listeners. And there were two types of pagers, if you remember. So describe what your pager does, or do you want me to tell them what a pager does there?
A pager basically lets you know to stop and call a number. It's notifying you that you got to find a rotary phone or a pay phone to call someone. Okay. There were no cell phones.
So let me, for those of you who have never heard this phrase before, and defining things like this is a lot of fun. It's a little black box that was about 3 inches by 2 inches by about a half an inch thick that you would clip to your belt or your purse or whatever. Somebody in your life, everybody who you gave a telephone number that connects to that pager could call it, and it would give them a recording that, hey, at the sound of the beep, you enter the number you want them to return, and they would punch in that number, and then it would light up on the little screen and notify you, beep, 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 and you would stop, and as Marianne said, you'd have to call. Now, pagers got a little more advanced. About 3 to 4 years later, you could actually have it leave a small text message, for lack of a better term. And you could text message this to the screen, a readout, hey, stop, call your wife, or stop and pick up some milk on the way home, or whatever you wanted to tell them, so they didn't have to make a return call back. That's a flashback in the past. It really is. I know you're not as old as this technology. That's interesting that you say that.
My pager was actually teal. So I think I was in the newer range.
You were. Mine.
I had that thing clipped on my pocket, back then. And when someone needed to reach me, they had their number. And you remember 911?
That's right. 911 said, stop and do it now.
That's right. Oh my goodness. The good old days.
Oh my goodness.
What about you?
Man, I would say that, hey, smoke signals after that one. I don't know, but no, not smoke signals. But, When we were kids, it was always the cool thing to take old tin cans and put a string between them, and with this little washer in the end, and you could hold it up, and if you're really quiet, you actually could make out what the other person said on the other end. It was kind of crazy. Wow. That was a lot of fun. But probably my favorite memory of communicating is very much along the lines of your journal concept between you and Chad. And I love that idea. If there's any parents out there, challenge your kiddos to do that journal. That's a great concept. But when my wife and I were dating, we met at college. And again, this is pre-cell phone days. Mm-hmm. This would have been in the mid 80s is when we were there, and mid to late 80s. And the rotary phones, or we did have pay phones in our dorm, and that's how we could call the girls in their dorm. But there were only 3 on one side of the dorm and 3 on the other side, 1 on each level of the stairwells. And so they were always occupied. So we had what was called a mail system, and there was a box inside the guys' dorm, and we could drop letters inside this gray box. It was about 2 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. And there was, as a matter of fact, my roommate was the mailman, is what we called him. His name was Rob. And at 8 o'clock, he would take that gray box over to the girls' dorm. There was only one girls' dorm on our Christian college, and there was one guys' dorm. And all the guys would stuff that box with letters to whoever they wanted to write to. And Rob would take that box a block away, and all the girls would gather in the lobby to see if they got a letter. And he would pass them out, and they would have an hour and a half to reply. And at 9:30, he would go pick up the box and bring it back to the guys' dorm. And you hope that the girl that you wrote would turn around and write you back. And if you were dating somebody, that was a regular ritual. You would send a letter at 8, she would send one back at 9:30. And I'm going to tell you, when Rob would open that box at 9:30 in the lobby of the guys' dorm, it reeked of about 20 different perfumes, because they sprayed those envelopes down. And you can imagine, 100 letters inside this box, and he's passing them out. And you'd get that letter, and you go up to your dorm room, plop down on your bunk, and you would smell it and read it. And so my wife and I passed back and forth a lot of letters. And when she went on drama tour, I actually kept that ritual going. She toured in the summer. I wrote ahead like 40 some odd letters for while she was on tour, and entrusted various people to deliver them to her every single day.
Wow. And
she still has my letters, and I still have her letters from all the way back at that period of time.
That's so incredible.
It is. It's a fun area. We say this because Leneita Fix, our guest, is going to talk through how our kiddos are learning to communicate back and forth today. And I want you to really hear, because she's quite an expert in the areas of Gen Z, and has been studying it for a number of years. And before that, actually spoke on millennials. And we wanted you to hear kind of, you've heard Dr. Tim Elmore 2 weeks ago. And if you didn't hear his study and his insight on Gen Z, you need to go back and pick up that one, and then listen to Leneita as she just kind of, to use a Mary Ann phrase, peels back the onion to this incredible generation in some wonderful ways. So when we come back from the break, we're going to hear from Leneita Fix.
Are you concerned about your church's future? Will it serve another generation? The Bible says He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and yet we often only know how to connect to Abraham. Let D6 help you connect with each generation. Your kids and grandkids are counting on you. D6 comes from the principles of Deuteronomy 6 and helps what happens in church also happen at home. Curriculum you can trust, discipleship that connects.
Leneita Fix has a ministry career that has spanned over 28 years spent in urban, suburban, and rural family-based ministry. She is the co-creator and director of the Own It Leadership Initiative at Berean Christian School, working with junior high and high school students. Currently, as executive director of the Reef Institute, Leneita aids over 7,000 people a month from age 5 to adult in knowing the wonders of the marine environment. Leneita, thank you for coming back again. You've been here so many times.
I know. I was looking at the first time I ever came. I just happened to look before I was coming to speak with you today, and I think it's been 5 years.
Wow.
So I'm very excited and honored that you would have me back.
Well, I typically, like at the 5-year point, I like to put people in the D6 Conference Hall of Fame. I don't have that privilege, and it doesn't even exist.
I don't get a jacket or anything.
Yeah,
like that,
I mean, I'm just making it up, and I may get fired for that. But sure, I'm going to put you in there.
Sure.
We're going to put your plaque on this imaginary wall right here.
Nice. I'll take it.
Today we're talking about a very important topic, and it's a topic that so many parents and so many youth pastors and pastors are just saying, we need help with this. And that's the anxiety that Generation Z is dealing with right now. It's no surprise. I mean, no one's shocked that we're coming off a pandemic. Everyone knows that's happening. And we've seen some crazy things happen in the last year. But even before that, things were going crazy. Studies have shown that even before the pandemic hit, anxiety was on the rise among teenagers. From what you've seen, how bad have things gotten since March of 2020? And is there any sense of normalcy that's coming back?
I think what's interesting, and I've had this conversation with multiple people in family ministry, just multiple people who work with kids and teenagers a lot, is that there isn't a sense of normalcy coming back, but we keep looking for the old normal. So as opposed to shifting societally and looking towards a new normal, or what does it look like, or how have we shifted, or how have things changed, we keep trying to get back to this place. And as you said when we started, they were already an anxious generation. They've already been cited as the most anxious generation in history. New statistics have just come out in the last couple months that talk about their anxiety and depression going through the roof. One statistic I always love to share is that teen rebellion statistics remain at all-time lows. So underage drinking, underage pregnancy, while anxiety and depression remain at all-time highs for this generation. And then the isolation that the pandemic caused has created an even larger sense of anxiety. I just had a conversation with a family pastor yesterday, and I said, so how are the teenagers, how are the students doing in your ministry in Michigan, because I'm in Florida? And he said, he has students that have had to go on antipsychotic medications because since the pandemic, they've developed tics, they've developed severe issues. So you asked the question, how bad has it gotten? I think it's gotten bad, and can we get back to normal? I think we need to instead look at a new normal and figure out how to navigate that forward.
Well, because cases were skyrocketing even before the pandemic hit, we know that it's not solely to blame for it. What has been the main source of anxiety in Generation Z?
So it's an interesting generation in that there is so much, there is such a large sense of perfectionism. And there was a really good article that just came out it was a really long article, but the idea behind it was called "What are the zombie ideas and college applications that need to die?" And it was these different misunderstandings of the way to apply for college that keep being perpetuated among parents and students. And one of the things that talked about in the markers of their future is there's this intense push to be over-involved, to do more and more things because they think this will get them a better place either in the college that they want or it will get them more money. So it will get them scholarship money to get into to be able to pay for college. This generation has a huge sense of the idea of not wanting debt, of not wanting to be a financial burden. They're very, very aware of this. And so because of all of that, this just keeps adding on. And then you add into, I like to talk about technology with Gen Z in the way that they interact with technology is, even before the pandemic, we saw this. They use texting. Technology has become peripheral. And what I mean by that is that because they always grew up with a touch screen, they really look to texting as a way to gather information. So they want to interact with information. What time is practice today? When is my homework done? Something like that. Then they have an entire sense of the idea of how to present themselves to the world. So Instagram, TikTok, that's all, how do I want to present myself to the world? Snapchat is, how do I want to be silly with my friends, that sort of thing. And even they had left Facebook, and this generation's actually coming back to Facebook to share political opinions and opinions on Facebook. And so what's interesting about all of that, all of those things together, it's not an easy or simple answer in 2 minutes or less. I think the source of anxiety for Gen Z is this constant idea of not knowing who the world wants them to be. And I think that is when you talk about what has become what has become more hyper and more into focus during the pandemic. I think that's one of the huge things that we see. So if you follow British soccer at all, my husband and my son are super into British soccer. There's a saying in British soccer that says it's the hope that kills you. So the idea is you don't hope for your team to make the championships this year because it's the hope that kills you. And I think that's almost become the mantra of this generation is it's the hope that kills us. I don't want to look too much to the future because what if it doesn't work out? It's this constant fear of messing up. What if I get it wrong? What if I get it wrong? But because we live in this flat world where they can constantly be gathering opinions and information, they don't know who they're supposed to be pleasing at any given time. And it's not even as simple as I want to please my parents, or I want to please my coaches, or I want to please my teachers. They don't know who they're supposed to be pleasing. And so they're kind of almost having an identity crisis. And now that Gen Z, the oldest of Gen Z is 24-ish, so we have a more solid foundation in college than we have, before when we've talked about Gen Z in the past, is that you're really seeing this come out when they get to college. I want to change my major, but what if I have to stay an extra semester? I can't figure myself out. It's almost like a panic attack about what they're going to be when they grow up. And so it's this constant overthinking who they are, what they want to do. And so what you're seeing is how it's exhibiting is kind of in almost one of two ways. They're either completely shutting down. So I think one marker we've seen during COVID is the driven student is always going to be driven, and the student that's struggling is always going to be struggling. But the wide berth that's in the middle, the ones that were more towards the driven side that we thought were driven, have kind of almost shrugged and given up. So I have a young woman that is a senior in high school that I'm in a discipling relationship with, third in her class, and finally just applied to community college because I guess I should do something. And so when you talk to her about what she wants to be a pediatric nurse oncologist. She is very driven in where she wants to go, but this sense of what if the world falls apart? What if everything goes wrong? What if I mess it up? Has become stifling. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And so what we're seeing is at one end, they're just the students that we thought were more driven are just kind of shrugging, and the ones that were kind of at the other end of not being driven at all, it feels like they're giving up. I don't think they're giving up, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah, and you mentioned the perfectionism that's going on. When I was in high school, that was me. Everything was driven. Your ACT score had to be a certain way. Your GPA had to be a certain way. You had to have so many extracurricular activities. And so there was no difference between perfectionism and excellence. It was one and the same as what I was told, because you have to get into this good school and you have to get this great job and make this money. Talking to teachers now, I'm hearing what you just said, that some students are just saying, forget it. Life is a mess. I'm just shrugging it all off. Where do we find the balance, or where do we break out of that with the perfectionism side of people that's saying I've got to be perfect, and then we have the other side that's saying if I can't be perfect, forget it all? how do we come out of that? What do parents do? It's such an enigma right now.
So it's really interesting. I just did with the group that I work with, about a month or so ago, I did a training with them on how to communicate to different generations. We did a leadership training on this is something important that you're going to need to know on how to, you know, the boomers are still not retiring necessarily. So how do you're going to be working with all these different generations. How do you communicate? And there was something really interesting that a couple of the students that I work with said about the millennial generation. They said, we love that they're more compassionate and they listen to us, but they just want us to experience life, and that's just overwhelming. What if I don't accomplish anything? What if I don't get anything done? So the conversation they feel like with those adults that are, you know, late 20s to through their 30s, which is, you know, really the stereotypical youth pastor, a lot of high school teachers, those people that are really in their life, it's coaches, those types of people. They said, we feel like we love the fact that they want to listen to us and they're more compassionate, but they just want me to experience life, and that's overwhelming. But then for the parents' generation, which for high school students right now is primarily Gen X, there's still some boomers that their youngest child is in high school, but it's primarily my generation. They said, we love that they want to drive us to more, but there's not a chance to breathe or to keep up. Everything's about moving forward. And so I think what we have to do to help this generation is, first of all, I've been saying this for years. When I started teaching about working with students when the average student was a millennial, many, many years ago, I've used this statement for a long time. I call it raising the bar and sticking it. So you raise the bar for a student, and then you don't move it for them. You don't drop it down. You don't push it up. You stick it. And then you do everything that you can to support them in getting there. And if they don't want to get there, then you kind of, the analogy that I would always use is that you come alongside the student that you see potential in, and you spend all of this time with them, and so you either lower the bar for them or you carry them up to the top of the bar, and then when you let go, they just drop. And then there's this frustration for parents, coaches, teachers, youth people, the church, of whoever's working with them, that they're dropping down. And so what you have to do is come alongside them and inspire them that they can reach this bar. And I think what we really have to do is redefine success for this generation. Yes. They have no idea what successful is. So in my generation, success was getting married, having children, having a good job, taking care of your family. And then our parents' generation was more of the traditional dad worked, mom stayed home, and dad wasn't overly involved. And so it was, let's be involved in our parents' life. You know, we were the generation of parents that, you know, became the helicopter parents. So, you know, we were almost overly involved. But I think what has happened now is that this generation, what is successful? They don't think that making money is successful. It's interesting because they're considered the most entrepreneurial generation in history, and yet getting them to move off the idea is exhausting. And I know somebody's going to hear this and go, but I know X student, or I've read this about this one student. Yes, we all have that one student. I'm talking about as a lump sum. Yeah. They talk about their ideas, but don't move on them. You still have that extremely driven, you know, student that's going to move forward, and the one that has a great idea. And so they don't really know what success is anymore. And so we've re-identified the family. Now it's the first generation in history that's re-identified. Family is anything. Family's the people that are close to you. And we think all of these things are progressive and great ideas, but the reality is they don't know what success is. So I think what we have to do is really mentor our students and our children in figuring out what they believe would be successful, and help them understand what spiritual success is. And if anybody who's listening figures out, you know, how to be, you know, spiritually perfect and not make mistakes, then you can contact me. I'll give you all of my information because I'd like to figure it out myself. I'm turning 49 next week, and I still haven't figured it out. But I think that's the other piece, is we have to help them understand that spiritual perfection isn't being wishy-washy in your faith. Jesus loved us in a very transformational, difficult way, but at the same time, and continues to love us in that way, but at the same time, it's not being perfect. And so helping them be spurred on for more in their faith and understanding what success looks like in their faith. And then on the practical side, if you figure out how to do something you love, you figure out how to take care of yourself and be, relatively self-sufficient, I don't mean self-sufficient spiritually, I mean on a practical level, not living in your parents' basement. And you're happy doing those things, then you have succeeded. And I think that this is a generation that really grapples with that. I know one of my kids really grapples with that hugely.
That's something for all of us to think about. Think about what success looked like to you when you were growing up, and think about how today's generation may be thinking about that as well. A little bit ago, you mentioned about how social media has kind of played a role in this, and kind of people projecting out who they want to be, trying to figure out who they want to be. Is there a great remedy for what parents should do about this? Do we need to tell our kids just throw out social media completely, you can't use it? Or is there a way that we can kind of use it in moderate ways so that it's not just taking over and causing this added anxiety that's unneeded?
I think it's interesting there before the pandemic, there were so many statistics that showed that students were going offline. So there was a pretty high statistic that I don't want to quote it because I can't remember the accurate statistic, but there was a pretty high statistic that said that a portion, like most of them, would go off for a period of time, and some were going off for good. I think what happened during the pandemic is we went from this very driven society where students were over-involved in all of these things to them being stuck at home and being isolated. And we thought that they were going to naturally rest in this place. And what I've seen is almost this twiddling of thumbs of, how do I get back out there? How do I not only get as involved as I want to fill all of my space more than I did before the pandemic. So what happened during the pandemic is I think not everyone, but they reattached to social media as a distraction and an outlet. So I'm going to go on Instagram and watch cooking videos. I think what has shifted is there's a difference between the middle school kind of fifth grade piece of Gen Z and the later high school college piece. I think the later high school college piece have figured out that it's exhausting to present themselves to the world. They have all been burned at some point finding out a friend who did something without them, and they've all been hurt by it in one way or another. And so they have fun on social media, but are a little less attached to the identity. So when I talk about that distraction, it was a lot of cooking memes and cooking videos and craft videos and whatever their topic of interest was. I'm gonna learn this TikTok dance and I'm gonna pull it off, type of thing. Whereas I do think that middle school age is still forming their identity in social media, and it makes sense. Those middle school years are about forming your identity. So I think, the very simple thing that we can do is continue to remind your children, remind the young people that you're involved with where their identity lies. I think we have to continue to remind them what is real and what is fake. I think that has become even more heightened for adults during the pandemic. We all decided to share our extreme opinions online. We could not be middle of the road, and no matter what my opinion was, it was the correct opinion. So I always loved the Facebook posts that would joke and would say, well, my opinion is correct unless you come along, and then your opinion is correct, but no, my opinion is really the right one. And so
it is, yeah.
I think that because of that, kind of that extreme place, even adults, if we're honest, lost a sense of what was right, what was wrong, what is appropriate to post and what is inappropriate to post. You do not need to know every opinion that goes through my head just because I'm stuck at home for 12 hours a day. I think you even had two groups of adults. You had adults like myself that my schedule never slowed up. I had to let several staff go, and so I was busier than ever before. But then you did have people that were looking up sourdough starters and, had all of this time on their hands. And so all of that to say that we have to admit as adults, we're not navigating social media very well. Yeah. It's not all them. It's us. So it kind of almost has to be a family approach of taking, I think adults at this point, parents at this point, understand the usual concepts of creating space where you're not online, creating family space. Different people have different opinions on whether or not you have certain times of the day that you're not plugged in, that you're offline or that you're online. That's parent to parent. I think there's a lot of information out there about that. I think the conversations need to be, you don't need to share every opinion that you have. I don't need to share every opinion that I have. But you know what? It's okay that we have different opinions. You also don't have to agree with everything online. And when you don't agree with it, you are not compelled to respond to the thing that you don't agree with.
Amen.
And so as an adult, we have to kind of have that ouch moment of dealing with that and then trickle that down to our kids. And this is a generation that has one of the reasons why I think anxiety is at an all-time high right now is the statistics showed before the pandemic that their preferred method of communication, because they're a very private generation, is face-to-face. They present themselves on social media or gather information, but if they want to be vulnerable with you, they want to be in person. I don't want anybody watching.
It's interesting. Yeah.
And so we took all of that away. And depending on what state you've been in, your kids are just going back to school in some states in person now. And so depending on where you are, what your choice was to homeschool or however it was, we took all of that ability to be face-to-face away. And I think that's what, honestly, if we're honest, that's what we're all hungering for. We are missing community. We are missing that idea of just being across from someone and having a conversation, because while Zoom gave us the logistical, or online gave us the logistical ability to connect, all of the nuances of an in-person communication were lost. So I used the example earlier today when I was talking to someone. I was involved in an executive director leadership program in the fall. All of the information was wonderful. What I didn't ever get was I didn't get to know any of the other executive directors in the group, because in an effort to be respectful of our time, all of those natural things that would have happened during lunch or during a break, or somebody says in passing, I'm from such and such, and you're like, oh my gosh, my cousin lives there. None of those things happened. And so I think going back to that social media piece, we have to more and more and more come back to creating spaces, whatever safe means to you, to be able to, and if it is online, create a space online that is free to have conversation, to read facial cues, to have conversations, and to be able to be in community. I think that's the piece that we need to get away from in social media. It's a little less about the anxiety. Yes, all of the statistics are still there about presenting ourselves, but I think if we were really honest, adults are doing the same thing. We're presenting ourselves to the world too. So
that's good. You talking about that made me think, like, I try to think back, when was the last time that I actually said, before the pandemic, that I said, I'm bored? And maybe that was like 10 years old or something, because we've just learned not to be bored. And then when people finally got bored and they started filling in the spaces with online arguments and expressing their opinions. And it's amazing how much has shifted because of what's happened in the last year. But even like you said, before that, we were already seeing things happen.
We were bubbling on the edge,
yes.
And we just created an incubator to make it happen.
Yes. Well, I want to end with this and just talk about some practical things. If parents have a child who is just experiencing just severe anxiety, whether it's over social situations or whatever it may be, what are some practical tips that you can give to parents where they can help their child?
So the first I would say is don't overreact, but don't underreact. So you want to pay attention to cues. You do want to pay attention to verbiage that indicates suicide. So you do want to be looking out for that. It's every parent's greatest fear. One of my children, we discovered in the past year, was grappling with depression. We knew that this child wasn't doing great, but the pandemic was honestly one of the best things that happened to them, because they came home from college and we realized it wasn't just, oh, I don't like the college that I'm at, or I don't like there was a deeper issue. And so it's navigating, listening for verbiage on if they're saying, I want to hurt myself, that's an immediate do not pass go, do not ignore it, do not feel guilty. The second thing is, if your children are struggling with anxiety and depression, it is not your fault. I think parents need to hear that. You have not done anything wrong. You have not failed them. It is not something that you have done. Mental illness runs in my family. And so I will often say to my mom, who grapples with multiple different mental illnesses, I'm not expecting you to get happy. I'm expecting you to get help. And so I think that's, navigating, it's not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong. You haven't been the worst parent ever. And focusing more on how you can help your student than what you did wrong. It's not about you. We need to lay our pride down. And I think, I say this often, the reminder is that Jesus loves our kids more than we do. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but he does. God loves our kids more than we do and wants more for them than we do. And so that journey might be tough as they go through self-discovery. So the other thing as parents we need to do is not back down. Don't treat this like, oh, they're just difficult and I need to just... That's why I said don't underreact and don't overreact. Don't create a sense of panic. Be watching, but don't leave their side. I know it doesn't feel like our middle schoolers and our high schoolers and even our college children want to be with us. There's a tug of war of them figuring out how to live life on their own. But something I have said for a long time, so people used to say to me all of the time, well, when your kids get to be in high school, they'll rebel. That's just what they do. And I was like, no, I'm not accepting that. That is not biblical. That's not a thing. But I think sometimes we think them asserting their own selves and having differing opinions from us and becoming their own people is rebellion. So look for genuine rebellion. That's disrespect. That's in your face versus and I think the other thing we have to be very aware of is verbiage that says, no, you don't feel like that. You're not really sad. You're not angry. So my child that's struggling with depression is in college, and I'm being vague intentionally to respect them, and calls my husband every day to talk to him and just wants to process things every day with my husband specifically. And secretly, sometimes do we get tired of 2 to 3 conversations a day of processing? Sure, we're human. But we're not tired of it because we're tired of the conversation. We want this child to be better and to be able to move forward and to be able to be able to move out of this place that sometimes this child gets stuck in. And so I think that's recognizing in ourselves that our frustration is not with our child. The frustration is where the place that they're in, and keep putting mechanisms in place that help them. If you can't do it, send them to counseling. That's okay. Our child has gone through some counseling and then opted out of counseling, but we constantly bring it in front of them. Hey, it is not a failure if you need somebody else to talk to. It's okay. And I think those are just some things that we have to work towards. And then I think giving them the freedom to fail is the last thing. So we just have to give them the freedom to fail.
Well, I appreciate you sharing this. This is such an important topic. It's a sensitive topic, but it's a needed topic. And I think what you've shared is really going to help some parents, and it's going to help some ministers, and it's going to help people who are struggling right now, because there's so many of us that are, and we need to know we're not alone and that there is hope and there is help out there. So thank you so much.
And other people are going through this too. When you say you're not alone, we've been through it as parents this year. We're continuing on it. You are not alone.
Yeah.
I think that's important to know.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Give your children and grandchildren a way to treasure your handwritten words with our new Generational Legacy Journal. About You, About Me, Generational Legacy Journal will guide you in telling your story while describing your kids or grandkids in ways that capture their hearts and leave an inspiring legacy. The left side pages tell your story, while the right side tells theirs, from the trivial to the powerful. Your child or grandchild will know each insight came from your experiences and observations about their life, their curiosities, their big milestones, and more, drawing them in to learn from your memories, insights, and encouragement. All the while, they will intentionally bump into scripture and your faith values. Visit d6family.com to order your copy of this Generational Legacy Journal today.
That was an outstanding perspective. And I captured some good sticky notes here. I really love that she defined how Gen Z is using technology. When she went through that, they use texting to gather info. They use apps to present themselves and how they present themselves. And they use Facebook for opinions. Mm-hmm. That was so interesting to me. And I work with Gen Z. And so I actually went to go check that because for myself, because that helps me be a good minister when I'm really paying attention to those details. And I'm thankful that she brought that out. She's right. When I go see texting from teenagers, when I go see Instagram, and some of the other apps, it's about presentation and how they're presenting themselves. And then Facebook, she said Gen Z's returning to Facebook for the place of opinion. Huh. They want to dialogue there, which I think is extremely interesting. I think one of the things that she helped me with, two sound bites for me, is she said, we've got to remind them of their identity. Yeah. And we've got to remind them of what's real and what's fake. Yeah. And I thought that's a great nugget for us to remember as ministry leaders and as parents. In light of the world they're living in, they're not sure of who they are and who the world wants them to be. And so there's identity confusion. So we've got to affirm their identity in Christ, and remind them who God made them to be and speak that into them. And then reminding them between what's real and what's fake. I mean, Ron, we're all trying to discern what's real and what's fake, digitally.
Definitely. She is a person who has dove into this field based upon reading articles. Marianne, I've heard you say that, hey, I went out and read this article on millennials. I read this article on, and we're all reading. How do share with our listeners how they can become a little more disciplined with reading and kind of, what's the term I'm looking for here? Gaining that insight on a topic they might not be familiar with. And that'll be true for anything that we're bringing to you on this podcast, or you hear somebody else, but to have that discipline of reading in your life. Mm-hmm. What's your habits? How do you dive in on a topic you don't know much about? What advice do you have for our listeners?
That's a great question. I do love to read, and I know that not everybody likes to read, but I do think that the older I get, I'm getting a distance from generations. And so they're still in my life and I'm still investing in them and I'm raising them. And we're seeing behavior. And so I think it's important for us to be learners. I think it's you who have said, learners are leaders and readers are leaders. And I think you've poured that into me in a lot of ways, Ron, in that we've got to be always learning, studying, and understanding our audience. One of our previous guests ended their podcast saying, don't miss a generation. And if we don't study and press in and learn, then we're going to. Because then we're kind of ministering on our terms and parenting on our terms. And so when we're learners and we're really trying to understand a generation and not just assume about a generation, oh man, the sky's the limit at what God might do. And rather than seeing all the negative sides of the numbers and those kinds of things, I think as ministry leaders and parents, we have to look at opportunities with those numbers. Yeah, it can be disheartening when you think about trends and they're important for us to know. But at the end of the day, I want to see that as an opportunity for God to change the world through a generation. And so we've got to study them. And I'll be honest, when I was a Gen Zer, I was thankful for those people that were trying to understand me and pour into me. So
exactly. One of the areas that makes it so hard for us to connect with our teenagers and then our young adult kids is when we don't keep up with what's happening in their world. I see parents all the time go, well, I don't understand so-and-so. And they become dismissive in that attitude. And like, they don't realize that dismissive is a disconnect. And it's a barrier between them and their kiddos.
It is.
And it creates a hard way to bridge the hearts. And so if our kiddos are learning something that I'm not aware of, I want to go out and know a little bit more. I'm not going to pretend to be the expert. And, these areas of all the different new social media emerging, I'm not on all the platforms, but I'm aware of what the platforms are. And my daughter or my son will share videos off of these other platforms with me that I should see. And I go watch and we communicate about it. But I know there's some parents out there go, well, I don't use that. I don't want to. And instantly that's a turnoff. It's a shutdown. And so I want us to follow the example that Leneita has set for us. I want what Marianne and other leaders of just being regular readers. And by the way, I'll throw this out. If you're not part of our top reads for busy leaders subscription, I would get on that. We have a team of incredible thought leaders in the area of ministry that are they're just sharing their regular reading habits with our team. And so we've got about 20 people out there that as they bump into articles, they turn them in every week to us. And then myself and one of our other colleagues, we read every one of those articles every Wednesday morning, and we pick the very best 12 of them. And we email them out at 6:30 a.m. on Thursday morning and say, hey, here's some articles you just need to be aware of. You might scroll through that list and only read one or two, or you might read several in there, but you can get that. It's an absolute free service. If you want to know where to go to get that, you just go to randallhouse.com. And when you click on randallhouse.com, you're going to look at what we do. And down there on that tab, there is top reads, and you can sign up to be on that list and start receiving that information. But it's vital for us to be students of a topic or multiple topics like Leneita has challenged us to be. So let me tell you, while we're all going to go out, read new articles on Gen Z and get ready, we've got a different topic we're going to hit next week, and it's one of my favorites, which is time management. I love time management. I could sit and listen to Rachel all day long, except I must confess, she deals with an area that I had to turn her off because I was starting to feel guilty for it. And we'll talk about that next week. But I'm looking forward to Rachel Price. Until then, we're praying that you have wonderful connections to the people God has placed into your life, and that you look for every day to be a wonderful opportunity to disciple those around you. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.